What's up? Stop the music. Turn that shit down. It's Sunday. We're streaming on a Sunday. You know, that must mean something's up. Sunday corn stream? What is this? What is happening? What is happening? We're streaming on a Sunday. My goodness. Give me a second. What's up? How's everybody doing? Sunday, the Lord's Day. Hope everyone had a good time at church. Getting as close together as possible so you can really feel the Holy Spirit. But no, I mean, surprise, surprise, we're a Sunday stream today. It's not our normal time, so I don't know how many of you lovely folks there will be on the stream tonight. But basically, last stream I did, the audio was really jacked up. So there's really nothing I can do about it, so I'm just going to redo it. And I was thinking of redoing it for the next Thursday stream, but I was like, no, there's other stuff that I want to talk about, so I'm just going to redo. I mean, I'm probably not going to say the exact same stuff, but it's the same topic. So we're doing a little bonus stream. I realized before the stream that I never mentioned, like, the music at the top is me. I don't know if most people, or if, you know, the magnificent few who watch these streams are aware. The rest of my channel, there's all kinds of music and things of that nature. That the show music that plays at the top of every episode, the top of every stream, is my version of Peace and Love from Steven Universe, in a sort of extra bossa-y ska. Messing with my stand. Okay. So I was like, hey, I don't talk about that too much. I don't really talk about my music on these streams. And I also have started to add donation links on, at least on YouTube. I don't really know how Twitch works. I think it has its own thing for like donations and subs and whatnot. I don't know if I'm able to get those things. I don't know if I need to do more stuff with my channel or whatever. I honestly have no idea. But I made like a little PayPal donation link, putting on the YouTube videos and on my various. I have like a link tree with all my stuff on it, and I put it on there just because, you know, I've said these streams, I don't really foresee them or intend them to really be a main thing for me. I don't intend them to be something I focus too much on. Obviously, I spend some amount of time, but not a whole lot, putting them together. At least in terms of like thinking about the subjects that I'm going to think about or speak about. But in the future, just looking at it now, looking at what my options are, and it seems to me like I have to be more prepared to get more of my income from online, whereas before, basically zero. Like any stuff I did online, any stuff I put out was just, you know, I just did it and I just hoped that people would see it and share it and stuff like that. But as I've put in time and money trying to get this stuff together. Again, this is all just groundwork stuff. A lot of it. Streams again are really more for me to get the experience of putting these things together. But obviously, I haven't put in, I might talk about some. Well, it'd be hard for me to talk about because I haven't really like put in the work to build like a base. But I mean, I remember back in the day where it was like, getting success like on YouTube or online or something like that. It was just like, it wasn't necessarily something you planned. It's definitely something not something that you counted on. But these days, like, honestly, like anything else, like if you have the resources from the top and you have the know-how of how these different social media sites work, you can pretty like there can be a pretty reasonable guarantee that you'll get some you'll start to get some traction if you're doing the right things, have the right visuals in terms of like cover art and all that stuff, and like the overlays, and then like the consistency in terms of stuff that you put out, the kind of stuff that you put out, the branding and all that shit. I think at this point it's pretty well figured out what you need to do to make this thing work as like a business. So I don't know. But I don't know. That's something that a lot of people talk about. If you watch, there's millions of YouTube videos about people talking about how to do this kind of thing. And I'm sure various streamers probably talked about how they get to the point where they're at. But anyway, that's really all I have to say off at the top. Again, to reiterate the change in schedule. So now we're doing Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then Thursdays at 3:45 Pacific Standard Time. With Monday being more like a gaming, like chill stream. Thursday probably being more of like the talking streams or music streams or something. I've been thinking about. I have some other stuff that I've been thinking about, so I won't speak too much about that right now, as I'm just kind of like floating the ideas around in my own head. But anyway, for today, again, this is basically a redo of last Thursday's stream because the audio was jacked up. It was like messed up and echoey. So we're doing it again. It shouldn't take as long. It only took me like 2 hours to get through just because I was cleaning my trumpets at the same time. But now I'm in my room. I got my microphone. I got my ring light, and we're good to go. So, what is the deal with What's the deal with capitalism? So Jerry Seinfeld. What I wanted to talk about, there's again, there's just so many, like, there's so many things happening right now. There's so many things to dig into. There's so much that I could talk about. There's so much that many people are talking about that maybe you're having discussions with people in your lives. You're getting word from social media, news, word of mouth, etc. I mean, just the in America, it certainly feels right now that we are in a very I don't know, it's one of those things where under normal times it could still have that same feeling of in your immediate, circumstances are fairly mundane, and then the world outside is just like on fire. And it can feel that same way, particularly if you are in a position where you are able to, or otherwise, like, you are generally isolating. We are still in the pandemic that is being severely mishandled. Um, but there is, I don't know, there's just something different in the air. Possibly, obviously, part of it is the pandemic, but there's just like, um, I don't know, maybe it's election season, fever or whatever. But anyway, the point being that there's a number of things that I could be talking about. But as I kind of mentioned in stream maybe a week or so ago, I don't want to personally in my own life nor in this stream. I don't want to just kind of bounce around from thing to thing and feel like I have to have the latest and greatest take on every single thing that's happening, because I can't keep up like that. And two, it doesn't help anybody. There are plenty of people doing that kind of stuff anyway. I'll let them do that. And I'll just kind of talk about things that I want to, I want to chew on. I want to sort of muse over and just try and come up with something more substantial. Try to find something actionable, or just something. Just try to find from where I am. Focus. Have enough focus to where it's not just constant regurgitation. So when I ask and I say what's to do with capitalism, the reason it is so important is because it's something that lies in the heart, at the heart of pretty much everything that I talk about. And I've wanted to spend a stream talking about it because I don't necessarily frame things in that way too often. I try to have like a super layman's kind of approach, just sort of a further distillation, I guess, of some of the things that I take in, and some of you guys probably take in. But I mean, capitalism in particular, it's just like, especially among like younger people, online people, like it's almost like a meme to say capitalism. It's something where the definition of it kind of mean whatever the person who's talking about it wants to mean, whether they want to say it's a good thing or a bad thing, and it just can kind of mean anything. And so I want to start with just a base, simple definition, and just kind of move on from there, and how it connects things from police brutality to monopolies, monopoly businesses, to the political sphere, to any number of things. So what is capitalism? I want to point out that at least in the YouTube video, both in this stream and the other stream, although I unlisted the other stream, I have linked to two videos in the YouTube description. I mean, if you're on Twitch, you can easily find my YouTube. The link is right there if you want to see what I'm talking about. Actually, where is the link to my YouTube? Doesn't seem to be on Twitch. That's unfortunate. Anyway, I'm LOKK9 basically everywhere. So in the description, I have two videos, both videos featuring Professor Richard Wolff. I often cite him and bring him up when talking about, these things and the economic side of things, because he is, one, he uses very consistent language. So if you watch him, if you're listening to him talk about a subject, Marxian economics is probably what you're gonna end up hearing him talking about. Um, if you watch one video of him speaking about something and you watch another one because maybe the first time you didn't quite understand it, he's gonna use very much the same language. So it's good. It's a good way of reinforcing. So consistent language, and two, very, very straightforward, very simple way of distilling these very, very these topics that can be like blown out exponentially into like vast levels of complexity and granularity if you want to. But his work is a fantastic jumping off point because it's very accessible. So in the description, I have two videos. One from a lecture at a college she's giving actually on socialism in America and the history of it, basically from the early 20th century, the labor movements that sort of gained all the labor rights that we sort of maybe take for granted to this day. Minimum wage and other things won in the New Deal. 5-day work week, 40-hour work day, 40 hours, 5-day work week, and things like that. Through to the post-war period, the sort of Red Scare, McCarthy era that sort of destroyed labor in America, and where we are now in the sort of resurgence of leftist activism and thinking in a more like mainstream kind of way. But he dedicates some time to sort of describe Marx's breakdown of the capitalist system, because what's important to understand is that when people talk about capitalism, they're not just talking about markets, and they're not just talking about trade. If I'm a baker and I have an onion and I have wheat and or an oven and wheat and shit, I make my own dough, I bake my own bread, and I sell it to you. That's not capitalism. Even if I buy the wheat from somebody else, if I'm baking the bread and I'm selling it to you, that's not capitalism. Neither is it capitalism if I, buy an offhand like phone and I resell it to somebody else. It's not just markets, it's not trade. That's not what that means. And it's important to understand the distinction, because when we get to expanding upon how this system creates a lot of these issues that I talk about, that many people are talking about, vast inequality and the ever-accelerating decline of our planet. Just as an example, you have to understand specifically what it is meant by the system of capitalism to understand why that system leads to these circumstances. So he goes through, he lays it out. Basically, I mean, it's like he spends like 15 minutes on this like long ass chapter of like Capital, which I read like a few paragraphs of on another stream, and it took like an hour. But I would watch those two videos to get more of an idea of what I'm talking about. What I want to basically outline what I would mean by this system called capitalism, how it's about organizing production, and how it goes on to organize other parts of our society. So if capitalism isn't just markets, what is it? It is a specific system, and he goes, Professor Wolf, he juxtaposes it with, in economy based on slavery, you have the master and the slave. In a feudal society, you have the lords and the serfs. And then in the capitalistic society, you have the employer and the employee, the boss and the worker. And fundamentally, the issue, and my issue, when it comes to basically anything, is the power dynamic that's at play. Um, so essentially, what is it that makes you a capitalist? Just because we're in a capitalistic system doesn't mean that all business is inherently, capitalistic. I mean, in a way, all of our infrastructure is. But here's what I mean. You have somebody who acquires tools and resources, and I'm just gonna borrow straight the example that Rich Wolf uses in that lecture. You have a guy who, through some method, he acquires all the necessary materials, wood, nails, glue, hammers, and a factory or whatever, to construct chairs. But he himself is not the one who's constructing those chairs. So what he brings to the table is the tools and the resources. Now, the thing that is going to turn those raw materials and those tools into a chair that will then sell on the market is somebody transforming it through their work. So then a worker comes in, takes those raw materials, the wood and the glue and blah, 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 and turns that into a chair. Now, that's the basic breakdown. At this point, I'm sure no one has any objections. Like, that seems to make sense. One party's bringing one thing, the other party's bringing the other thing. They're coming together, and they're making a product that can then be sold to someone who wants that product. Now, here's where the turn comes in. So, just to keep it sort of simple and abstract, again, I'm basically saying exactly what Richard Wolff says in that video, just to keep it fairly simple, because I don't need to think of, if I'm left to my own devices, I'll come up with 10 different metaphors and analogies for one thing, so I'm going to stick to one. So, say the value of the raw materials and the tools is 50. Doesn't matter what it is, 50, whatever. So that is what the first person brings. And the workers, by using their labor to turn that raw material into a chair, say they add another 50 in value. So the chair can be sold for 100, whatever. Again, this seems pretty straightforward, but obviously if you're thinking ahead, then you might understand that what happens next. The chair goes on the market and it sells for 100. Now, what is done with that 100? So obviously 50 will go to compensate the initial person, the capitalist, the one who has the capital, i.e. the resources used to create the chair. So what happens with the other 50? Does it go to the worker who added that value to the chair to make it something that can be sold on the market? No way. The value, or what will be paid to the worker, basically must always be less than the value added by their labor. And I had a better flow, I think, in the first stream, but that's essentially the layout. And what I wanted, that's the basic system. Now, I mean, the usual arguments are probably going to be there, where it's like, well, if the person with the resources wasn't there in the first place, there'd be no chairs. Well, the same thing with the worker. Oh, the worker can be replaced. Well, the capitalist can be replaced too. You just need someone with resources. Anyway, the worker could have the resources. Oh, a group of workers could pool together their assets or their capital to, provide the resources necessary to make the product that they're going to sell. But anyway, the key parts are, I think, a couple of things. So the first part is that key dynamic in that whole system is that the capitalists, i.e. the one who brings, they bring the resources and the tools. They don't do anything with them, and you don't know how they acquire them. They just have those things. That's what they bring. Now, the workers are the ones that actually turn those raw materials into something that is, sellable on the market. But the capitalist will always get to decide the terms of what is done with the money at the end of the day, and if, who's hired, who's fired, and so on and so forth. That's key point one. Key point two is that it is not about individual greed. Because even if Jeff Bezos decided that, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore, and he just gives away all his money, all the various apparati are still in place. The Amazon infrastructure is still in place. I don't even know if he could dismantle it, as well as the other various structures of our economy. The way it's designed, funneling money towards a smaller number of individuals versus the majority of regular people, and the endless drive towards maximum profits. Because if your system is basically set up to do those two things, one, make as much money as possible, and two, funnel it to the fewest number of people, whatever the decisions of the people at the top is not going to change that unless they all just collectively decided to lay down arms and then somehow reconstruct the whole thing. It doesn't matter. It's not about individual greed. That's why we talk about systems and not individuals. That's why I'm talking about the system of capitalism versus individual capitalists. Now, we could talk about individuals because some of these individuals can have very, very detrimental effects, sort of exponential to their own individuality, just because they have all these resources. Someone with a ton of money can do a lot more damage than someone with no money. But those are the two key things. The dynamic wherein one party makes the decisions and stands to gain the most benefit, and the fact that the system continues regardless of individual motivations. It has nothing to do with greed. So that's the basic rundown, as simple as I can think of. Professor Wolf and Marx will continue, where does that go from there? Because obviously it doesn't end there. What happens to that money? Well, the capitalist, the boss, and obviously they can pay themselves more, which they often do, but that money will that money will be invested in other ways in order to perpetuate their position as the person in charge and to perpetuate the system that allows people like them to benefit. So it comes in a variety of ways. Again, basically any business, any company, it's going to be the small minority of individuals who are making these decisions. Maybe it's one boss, maybe it's a board. So maybe the profits will get paid out to the board, the shareholders, a small number of people within or outside of the company, buying stock and things like that, or investors getting their money back. Or it goes into basically not technically laundering, but I mean it's a good sounding word, right? There's two other avenues. One, which is the philanthropy route, which helps with lowering tax costs and keeping the heat off. It's like paying a bribe to society. It's like, we're okay with people making these exorbitant amounts of money that could never be spent in lifetimes, as long as you give a little bit to charity. But as long as, which they can do as long as they understand that it's not fundamentally going to change their position in the world. But what will and what does perpetuate it is the other key aspect of where does that money go. And no one should be naive about this part. I mean, I don't think any of this is really up for debate, but I mean, this last part definitely is absolutely incontroversial, I would imagine, about just about anybody, which is lobbying, spending money in the political arena, donating to politicians, paying lobbyists, talk at politicians, going to fundraisers and things like that. And it's not necessarily like a one-to-one where it's like, if I give you $1 million, you literally do everything that I say. But if you have enough people giving enough money, it becomes harder and harder to say no, because a lot of our politics is about who has the most money, who can buy the most ads, who can do the most oppo research and things like that. About getting and keeping power. You need money to do that. And if you want, if you would like the rules to benefit you, why don't you just go straight to the rule makers? People in Congress and so forth. So then we could see how this fills out in just about every arena of our lives. And to talk about specifically how that manifests, because what I really want to do when I talk about this, I want to be able to specifically tie it into things that people are generally aware of now. We're generally aware of police brutality. And I think people are pretty easily able to connect that to race. Obviously, there's plenty of people in America who deny that, either cynically because they have something to gain by denying that, or just, for whatever other reason that they have to deny racial dichotomy in America. But the reason it's important to understand that from this angle, that, okay, our economy is structured in this way. What does that have to do with these other social issues? I mean, you can look at, if you turn back the clock, even racial disparity has an economic foundation in America. I mean, the institution of slavery I've talked about. Slavery in America basically was only the burden of, Africans, black people. Brought and owned over generation as free labor. And creating a wedge between ethnicities is something that is historically documented as being explicitly to decrease the power of these marginalized groups. A slave from Africa, an indentured servant from Ireland, or whatever, in title they might seem different, and in color they might seem different, but in their situation, in the way they're treated, it's not that far apart. Clearly there are differences, obviously. But they're much closer together with each other than they are with the master. So how do you address that as, the ruling group? Drive a wedge in between them, which was happening. They were starting to band together, and so what do? Help to create laws that clearly mark black people lower. Of course, they didn't. They wouldn't be so polite to use the word people. But put that group below the other one to make it so that they don't have that same connection. And the history of that, and the history of chattel slavery in America, is just like it's historically so recent, and the like almost one-to-one through lines between, you know, full-on slavery to what we have now, are it's just so like massively present. Um, Obviously we have in modern times, right? There's no more slavery, um, except that's absolutely not true. There's still functional slavery, both in America and globally, obviously. Um, and it's probably part of a discussion that you've been aware of as we're talking about policing and prisons in America. The 13th Amendment, which says no slavery unless you're a prisoner. And so what do we have? The biggest prison population in the world, and we're not the most populous country in the world. We have by far the most prisoners. And what do you know? Black people, although they only make up, say this percentage of the population, they make up, a significantly larger percentage of the prison population. And beyond that, okay, we're not segregated anymore in this country, except there is clear concentrations of poverty geographically that have historical ties to places that were segregated not too long ago. Very, very, very clear through lines in terms of the racial disparities in this country. What does that have to do with capitalism? The basic answer is, basically what I would say for most things is that it's money and power dynamics. So, well, obviously it saves the boss money if you don't have to pay your workers hardly anything. Although I don't know if we've determined where the cutting off point between worker and slave is. I think that's not a line we've established very well in this country. Fucking shoulders. I need a better chair. Hit that PayPal donation. Anyway, there's that aspect of it. Obviously, the ability to pay as little as possible, and the racialized aspect. Because if you create underclasses and you create these marginalized groups that are all marginalized in different ways to make it difficult for them to come together, it makes it easier to maintain power. I mean, I've talked about specifically like with this pandemic or in other economic crises, when the storm hits, it's the little guys that get washed out, because big companies that have the money and the clout to go to the government and beg for money, or banks or whatever, they will weather the storm, and then they will just absorb all the competition that was washed out. Because I mean, it's crazy how we still have this discussion. It seems so naive when we talk about like markets and stuff like that, where people it's like if you let the markets be free, then the best products will rise, because capitalism is really just about innovation. It's about freedom. Which is like, I don't know, it just seems so disconnected from reality. Because there's so many examples, especially now. There's not a lot of new innovation. There's not a lot of new markets. Like, the whole world has been connected to the global market. And there's not a lot of great new technology coming out. I mean, certain things are getting better, but it's not like these massive new innovations are taking place. What you see a lot of is like this like startup like tech bullshit, where say a company like Uber or something, where like they've basically been operating at a loss for the entire time they've existed, um, but for some reason they get to continue. Um, doesn't make sense. What are they bringing to the table? Cheaper taxis that are more convenient because you can tell them to come to you on your phone. But it's not a bad idea, except for the fact that it leaves their workers hanging because they don't consider them as, their employees. They're independent contractors and they have, really no protections. It's kind of like, I guess you call it like vulture capitalism, where it's just like, really, the way to make money is to cannibalize other industries and become the dominant market force, or become to dominate the market, so that everyone has to go to you. For example, Walmart's, how they suffocate small town businesses by pricing them out, or cable companies. Like, you could, if you were like a genius inventor and you found a way to give everybody like super efficient, like super fast internet, and you just somehow did that on your own, good fucking luck starting your own cable company. You would get, priced out so easily. It's not about innovation, it's about dominating markets. And in terms of like freedom, I mean, like, I feel like every stream I do talks about just what we're lacking as a society, and how poorly we are equipped for actually giving people the ability to make choices in their lives and actually have some sense of security and a fundamental guarantee of some sort of, I would say happiness, or just, just something, a dignified living. How difficult that is with all these different forces at play. So there's that aspect of it as well. But really, what is it? Why? And again, I don't think I can go over absolutely like every little bit of like what makes it tick. And I mean, I try to make these connections anytime I talk about these different things. Like, in the scrap stream, I made the connection between police brutality and Amazon, because Amazon teams up with the cops with like Ring and shit like that. And what do cops have to do with the system as it is? Because obviously, we see how the force of policing is waged in a racially skewed way, but that usually ties into economic, right? Like, if you live in a wealthy area, the cops aren't there. They're not busting down your doors and shit. And if you have enough money and influence, a lot of laws, I'm not going to say most or a lot, but there are plenty of laws that don't necessarily apply to you once you enter a certain level in society. It's mostly people in poorer areas, which tend to be concentrated among black and brown people in this country, but obviously there are concentrations of poverty in white communities and other communities, which doesn't, delegitimize the racial argument. But that's just saying that it's another facet of it. Because the reason why I want to talk about this is because it's not simply the racial aspect. Because cops, again, if those that have the power, the influence, and the money to influence the creation of the laws, and then it's the cops' jobs to enforce those laws, of course it's going to play out in that way, right? Because that's just recreating that dynamic on a different level. And so like the cops domestically are really just part of the investment to have that the muscle for the people with the money to keep the level of subjugation necessary to where, there has to be that balance between I don't know, complacency and subjugation, because if it gets bad enough, which it does, people will act. But there's that right balance between giving people just enough to where they can tolerate it and keeping them under heel enough to where they don't feel motivated to act. They don't feel like they can. And I talked about it in my stream about hegemony and how we can recognize things are terrible but not really see the way out, and how that's not just a coincidence, how that's something that's very much engineered and continues to be built up over time. And in the scrap stream, I also tied it to this. So the prison industrial complex, which I sort of outlined, the front edge, the tip of the spear, which is kind of like cops on the street, how they terrorize poor communities and enforce, the subjugation necessary, like I said, to at least keep that tenuous dynamic together, the social dynamic between, the poor and the rich and so on. And then there is the other section that I mentioned, the prisons themselves, which make tons of money. They benefit from almost free prison labor. The various industries that go into supporting that. People got to make the jails, they got to make the cells, they got to make the technology that is used, the weapons, crowd control stuff that police and security use. But I also mentioned the military-industrial complex, as President Eisenhower warned us of. And it manifests twofold. On one hand, as I mentioned, there isn't really... we can't create new markets. We simply enforce our market will on others. We can enforce it economically, and then we can back it up with military might as well. So if a country is not, look at South America. If a country is not operating the way we like, we can sanction them to hell, or we can use a deep state apparatus to instigate a coup and put in someone who is, more brutal, certainly not democratically elected, but benefits, global, these days global, maybe 50 years ago it would be more American businesses, but these days they operate wherever they want. And again, historically, it's not like a conspiracy theory or anything like that. I mean, we know that this happened in many South American countries where Democratic elected leader tries to take some part of their economy, take some autonomy over their the economy in their country, try to diversify it. Similar, like if you're an investor, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You want to diversify because that protects against risk. But if you're a country that is economically beholden to another country, to where you only produce the things that they want you to produce, then when you're not useful, or when there is economic downturn in those countries, you're fucked, and you have no way of, if you don't have a diverse agriculture and things like that, like if you don't have money, you can't feed your people, right? And if your market has become entirely dependent on another country, and you live off of importing and exporting, and you have no sustainability of your own, then when you're not useful or when things take a downturn, then you're screwed, right? So, And the other part of the military-industrial complex, the specific part that Eisenhower warned about, post-war. Again, we were in a depression in the early 20th century. And we came out of that by production on a massive scale. Government subsidized production that became highly privatized. And the thing that Eisenhower warned about was creating a permanent military economy where people would see that it's so profitable to make arms and technology for the purposes of warfare that it would motivate perpetual war in order to grow and continue that economy, that military economy. And what do you fucking know? We've had an endless war almost ever since. And the evidence is in our massive military budget. Again, we're number one. And it's like, who are we fighting? And that money is not going to personnel. It's going to these private companies, Raytheon, Boeing, so on and so forth, who create the planes and the drones and the missiles and the guns and the ammo. And they stand to gain a whole lot from armed conflict. And even if we're not fighting anybody, even like keeping the cultural conditions that we feel we need to have this massive war stockpile, this capability to wipe anyone out in an instant, even though our ability to do warfare in the 21st century is hindered by, the way it is being done in the 21st century. And this is, again, why it's not about personal greed or morality. I mean, like, I'm sure these guys who work at these companies are more or less evil than any other company, but they're doing what any company would, which is acting in a way that benefits them and the board and the shareholders the most. And the institution of the military is not designed to question these things. It's just designed to carry these things out. And again, when the money goes into the politics, and the policy comes out money, then the policy will reflect that. Which is why, again, it's not about individual morality. It's not about individual greed. It's about the fact that it's structured in a way to where very few get to make the decision, and the main goal is to make as much money as possible. So I talked about it. It was a little more disjunct than I think than the previous one, because I was just trying to recap what I was talking about. But as long as the base point, if there's anyone who's confused about what other people mean by capitalism, or if there's like too many definitions, I think this is the most having a simple but this effective definition that you could then broaden out and make these connections between these various conditions and these various issues in our society, where it's that fundamental distinction to that, one, the worker is always getting ripped off, and two, it's the boss that gets to make the decisions with that money. The power dynamic there, and what motivates the money. And so I wouldn't want to leave with just that part of it, because I want to be able to offer. There are so many people talking about what we need to do about specific things: defund the police, abolish the police, and things like that. No billionaires. I mean, like, there's so many little things that we could do that would improve for so many people. Yes, making it so that these police department budgets aren't well and above the highest highest dollar item on a city, municipality's budget. Cutting those in half and then investing those extra resources into other parts of the community. Having in a pandemic, having healthcare be a guaranteed thing, and so on and so forth. All these things that are very, very, very much worth fighting for, and should be the fight to increase the minimum wage. Even though now we know that, even now we haven't fully gotten that $15 minimum wage, but we know it's essentially obsolete. It doesn't keep up. Minimum wage, yes, was supposed to be something that you could live off on. Certainly $15 an hour most places would still not be a living wage. And two, if we look at general productivity versus the general increase in productivity over the last half a century versus the general increase in wages, they are very much not in correlation to each other. Productivity has gone way up, and wages have barely, a lot of places, it's hard to say if they even keep up with inflation. I mean, wages are so stagnant, and yet more and more is being produced more efficiently. So any argument about it's about how hard you work, or honestly, all these arguments can be shot down fairly simply if you take it one by one. But most of them are brought up cynically. But what I want to focus on is just a baseline definition. But the thing about those solutions is that they would improve people's lives, and they should be sought after, and they should be fought for, and everyone who's doing those things is certainly commendable. The big picture thing, though, and the reason why I think it's really important to tie all these things together and be able to point out that here's this very fundamental thing: the way our economic system is structured. Understanding that, while also understanding these discrete issues and having solutions for these discrete issues, what will not change is that fundamental power dynamic, where the small few have authority over the vast majority and make decisions controlling their lives. Because we have a semblance of a democracy in our political sector. We get to vote for the people who make decisions over our lives, sort of. But what we don't have control over, we don't have any sort of autonomy or decision about, is in the workplace. Yes, you can move from this job or that job, but for the most part, there's always going to be somebody who tells you what to do and controls your life for the better part of most of your days. You spend 8 hours working. You spend, how many other hours preparing for that work, recovering from that work. It takes up the majority of your life. And yet you have no say over hiring, firing, what your company focuses on, what your company does with profits, so on and so forth. There is just a complete absence in democracy. As a society that values democracy and freedom in words, in practice, it definitely does not play out that way. So again, I'll go back to Professor Wolff as an example. What he touts, what is a very, I think, a popular counter example, I guess, to what our current economic system is what if we got rid of the middleman and said we don't need a capitalist, we don't need a boss necessarily. We can have managers still, but we don't need someone who all they provide is, the raw materials and the tools. The workers can pool together, they can provide those things, and then at the end of the day, they can decide what to do with that money. The great example that he gives is okay, trying to imagine that system versus this system. So in the current system, say you make chairs again. And a new technology comes out that makes it so that you can do that twice as efficiently. You can get it done in like half the time. In the current system, what would happen in a company if that were the case? One option would be to just, have production be the same except with double the efficiency and have double the product and sell that amount, although that would mess up with your market value, right? The other option would be to fire half your workers and just make the same amount. The other would be to cut your workers' hours in half. And if you live in a place like California, then you wouldn't have to pay for their health insurance and things like that. Try to imagine in a situation where the workers themselves were the ones to make decisions that affect their lives. Would they fire themselves? Would they cut their own wages? Probably not. I mean, they could do it where everybody's shifts are halved, but they make the same amount of money because they're still getting the same income in, or cut down the number of days that they come in, but keep the hours the same. I mean, there's just one example, but there's numerous situations where you might think, what would a boss do who's making decisions over everyone's lives that don't necessarily affect them, versus if I am the person who's doing the work, who's making this thing run, who puts this thing together, what kind of decision would I make over my own life? Again, that's just one example of a way to create an alternative. There are many others, but I want to provide at least one. And again, I guess to wrap up, the reason I focus, the reason I always try to bring up the economic side is because it's so fundamental to all these different things. It's not the only thing, but it ties all of it together, at least to a significant level in most cases. And that's where the power is with the economic side, the money. So, again, that's why the focus is often on workers, people who make this shit run. Because, at the end of the day, someone could come in with a bunch of money and a bunch of resources and tools and factories and stuff like that, but if there's no one in them to make the products and make the thing go, there is no business. So the worker is essential, and because the worker is essential, they can put a wrench in it. That's part of the leverage that a worker has, by putting a wedge and forcing the system to slow down or stop. You can use it as leverage to gain some concessions. But ultimately, what is necessary and what we're looking at for general solutions is that a mass of people who represent the majority in any situation need to have an understanding of the system that they're in, the deal that they're getting, which is always they're gonna be on the short end of, and they have to see beyond the fact that as individuals they have very little power in that dynamic. As an individual worker, wherever I am, I can't necessarily change up the whole game. So collectively, that's where power is. Right now, people are out there going in the streets and they're making their demands. The only issue is they're making it to politicians where that often falls on deaf ears. So we need to find different avenues and we need to create alternatives. This is what I've talked about in terms of creating alternative institutions. Institutions beyond our institutions of education, beyond our institutions of Democrats and Republicans, beyond our institutions of these workplaces and these markets. We need to start really thinking long term and really thinking of creating alternatives while at the same time trying to improve the lives of the majority of people by getting these concessions from those in power. So again, it's important for that reason to have a clear understanding of what it is that's going on, and to understand what part you can play, because obviously you make your decisions as an individual, even though it takes a collective to bear significant results. So I think that basically is the gist of what I wanted to cover. I know I kind of went all over the place, but if you've at least watched a few of the streams, hopefully these different things, I try to use some of the same examples. And I try to be somewhat general when describing it so that I can go back and I can apply it to specific things. Again, I try not to get too much like current eventy, because that can get overwhelming both for me and for an audience. But I think it's important because I see a lot of like the words capitalism, socialism, communism, whatever, they get thrown around quite often, and again, they kind of mean whatever the person wants them to mean, even though there's historic and academic basis for these terms and these definitions, a technical one for all of them as well. So I again, this is just another piece that I think is important, so that we can understand the context of these things that we're all learning about and we're talking about. Because if we want to address the issues, we can't just look at it from one dimension, because these issues are not just one-dimensional. They are multifaceted. And if we want to have any kind of if we want to have any kind of real if we want to be able to have some control over our own lives and affect the change in our world, we need to be as well equipped as possible. So we need knowledge, we need community, and we need longevity, be fortified. Always bring it back to Cornell West. So I hope that's understandable. Again, I highly encourage anybody to watch those videos in the YouTube description of Richard Wolff with 2 F's, going over some of these concepts. It helps to get the ideas reinforced, even if it seems repetitive to go over it over and over again, and try to apply it to your own life and start to understand things and start to connect these dots and start to help other people connect these dots, and find ways that you can take action in small and think long term and think big picture, because that's what's going to be necessary. Unfortunately, voting will never, ever change the game. It can have real effects on your life, but it's not going to change the game. So you can do both, but you can't. I'm not going to say you can't just vote, but if we're looking at what this project really is, we have to be as multifaceted as these issues. Seem overwhelming, but again, that's why community and solidarity is the important thing. And so I hope to be able to connect more people on this thing. I hope that others are able to connect with people in their lives, in their workplace, and so on, and to really get at the heart of these issues and to be able to see through the bullshit, because there's a lot in just about any area of discussion. There's always going to be some bullshit. And usually you just have to follow the money, right? So I think that basically wraps up what I want to talk about. Again, tomorrow will be a gaming stream. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do yet. Thursday, 3:45 Pacific Standard Time p.m. Twitch and YouTube. I have some ideas what I want to talk about. I might. I don't know if I'll talk about that now or if I'll just announce it later because it's always subject to change. But anyway, again, this is making up for the stream that crapped out last time. So if you somehow watched both things, if you watched this one, hope that was helpful in any way. But thanks for capping off your weekend with the good old corn stream. I'll see everyone on Monday. Until then, stay safe, stay sane.